you folks put out a issue brief today, adding it all up. Kind of, you teed it up a little bit, but what's your reaction? What's your first take on where Ways and Means is going?
I mean, I don't know if the word garbage fire is too nice or not. But this is a package that not only would add tremendously to the debt, um, that not only would use some serious gimmicks that are going to put so much pressure on future Congresses to add more to the debt, but also really mucks up the tax code. Mucks up with an M. I just want to be clear.
Yes, I know. We got that. Yeah.
Um, you know, tax reform used to be about cutting tax breaks, improving simplicity. For all my problems with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, actually, I pretty much had one problem, which was that it adds to the debt. But it moved directionally towards what tax reform always had. It lowered the rates, broadened the base, it reduced the number of itemizers, promoted simplicity. This tax reform is the exact opposite of that. Yes, they extend and make permanent some parts of the TCJA, and but for the cost, permanent stable tax policy makes sense. But then they create a ton of new temporary tax cuts, mostly last 4 years, for basically anything that anyone could want. So there's no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, deduction for auto loan payments, new MAGA accounts at childbirth, temporary increases in the child credit and standard deduction, temporary expensing for factories, but not permanent. I could go changes to health savings account to basically just make them sort of ways to evade taxes by saving more for rich people. All sorts of stuff. There are dozens of new tax cuts, most of them temporary, most of them adding to tax complexity, most of them benefiting higher earners, or if they're benefiting low earners, it's because they have a bunch of silly phase outs that make them very complicated. And so just the product itself is kind of a mess. And then we dig into the numbers. And here's the numbers. As scored, there is about $5 trillion worth of tax cuts, $4.8 trillion worth of tax cuts as scored. But I mentioned to you already, a bunch of things expire after 4 years. If those things are extended, it's about $6.3 trillion worth of tax cuts, 6.3 trillion. Now, there are some offsets in the bill. They phase out a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. They have some program integrity related to the Affordable Care Act, changes to executive compensation taxation and corporate charitable deduction and endowments and stuff like that. There are offsets. They're pretty sizable. It's $1 trillion. But $1 trillion out of 6.3 still leaves us $5.3 trillion in the hole.
That's how does it compare with what they tried to do in the budget resolution in their so-called reconciliation instructions?
Right. So they technically meet the reconciliation instructions. The reconciliation instructions allow the Ways and Means to add 4.5 trillion of the debt if other committees save 2 trillion and 4 trillion if other committees save 1.5. So they are below that 4 trillion. So they are meeting the instructions. Part of the way they're meeting the instructions is the offsets. And some of these are offsets I wish would go for deficit reduction because they're kind of common sense things we shouldn't be using to offset new things. But another way they're meeting those instructions is the sunsets, right? They are having a bunch of policies go into effect for 4 years, and then magically they're going to disappear December 31st, 2028, or in some cases, December 31st, 2029. At the same time, they're arguing we can't possibly let any tax cuts expire. That's why we have to do this extension.